So welcome, everyone. My name is Rachel Ruttenberg. I'm the board president for the Democratic Party of Evanston, and we're so happy to host tonight's event on ranked choice voting. We will see ranked choice voting on our ballots this year, or right now. Ballots are able to be filled out and submitted at the Civic Center right now, or many of us have our mail-in ballots waiting for us on our dining room table, ready to be filled out as well. So last year was when the Democratic Party of Evanston Board of Directors decided to get behind this effort. And so for the last year, we've been working with partners Fair Vote Illinois and Reform for Illinois, as well as national organizations, including Rank the Vote, Represent US, and Fair Vote National, to get the word out to voters and answer questions about ranked choice voting. The League of Women Voters of Evanston has also endorsed this referendum. So what we will actually see on our ballot after all the judicial races and judicial retention votes on the last page is a referendum that says, in part, do you want Evanston voters to use ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff voting, to elect the city's offices of mayor, clerk, and city council members, beginning with the April 2025 consolidated election? So because that question is being posed to us and DPOE has been an early supporter of this effort, tonight we've pulled together this wonderful duo, and we will hear what Mayor Biss has to say about ranked choice voting and how it might help us and work in Evanston, as well as New York City Council member Crystal Hudson. And from her, we will hear about what it was like for a candidate in a campaign to get elected under this system during her election just last year. So let me introduce our panelists, and then I will hand it over to Greg Andrus, who's our DPOE Vice President, who will be the moderator for tonight. I also want to shout out Jean Newman for putting together this wonderful program, as well as Neil Weingarten, who is all the things at DPOE. So we always appreciate Neil. It is my pleasure to introduce Daniel Biss. Daniel Biss represented Evanston in each house of the state legislature from 2011 to 2019. He ran for governor in 2018 and was elected mayor of Evanston in 2021. He was a math professor at the University of Chicago before his political career, and he was born in Akron, Ohio, and lives in Evanston with his family. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
And Council Member Hudson. After graduating from Spelman College and George Washington University, Crystal Hudson worked in sports marketing before moving back home to Brooklyn following her mother's diagnosis with Alzheimer's. As her mother's primary caregiver for 8 years, Crystal saw firsthand how hard it was for everyday New Yorkers to access the resources they needed. This realization led her into public service, serving in various roles for elected officials, including as deputy public advocate. She ran for city council in 2021, the first year that New York City instituted ranked choice voting for municipal elections. Councilmember Hudson represents a racially and economically diverse district in Brooklyn that struggles with some of the same issues like gentrification and housing affordability as Evanston. She and her partner live in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn, and welcome to Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you so much.
So pass it over to you, Greg, and we're excited to get this conversation going.
Well, thank you very much. Again, I'm Greg Andrus. I'm the vice president, and the first question for Daniel is really a little bit about a background about where this initiative is coming from. So why don't you start just by telling us how this ballot initiative, came to be on the ballot that we're all going to see this November or next week, as it were, and why now? Why is this happening? Why is this coming to us now?
Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Just two things before I jump in. First of all, we're really lucky to have Councilmember Hudson here. So I'm going to try to keep my answers brief because I'm really excited to hear from her. I want to thank you, Councilmember, for joining us. It's this conversation should not be theoretical, but it's necessarily theoretical when it's only held by people who've never been involved in the system before. So thank you for giving us the the real background that we need here. The second thing is the city does not advocate on ballot questions like this. And so in my role as mayor, I don't advocate. In my role as a private human being with First Amendment rights, I, of course, am allowed to have opinions and advocate for them. And I will be doing that tonight because I'm passionate about this and supportive of this. But I just want to be very clear that I'm doing this in my role as Daniel, as opposed to in any kind of official capacity that might be construed as representing the city of Evanston. I'll give a really technical answer to Greg's question. The referendum is on the ballot because council voted overwhelmingly to put it on the ballot. That's the process that we have to make changes to our governmental system by referendum. They initiate from city council. I think basically you had some council members who I agree with who saw a couple things. First of all, they saw this system spreading in the country. They saw other communities that are politically like us, which is to say progressive communities that value both activist governance and diversity of representation, adopt it, and they saw it work well in those communities. And I think they also saw that sometimes we can get a little bit stuck in Evanston where we have a system where things become either oppositional or polarized enough that it's hard for us to make progress. And then the real aspirational values that are really shared both by our community and our elected officials are kind of hard to turn into action because we wind up just at odds. And I think an electoral system that selects for people who are good at being somebody else's voter's second choice, an electoral system that selects for people who ultimately have the support of a majority of their constituents, has the opportunity to be an electoral system that gives us the kind of coalitions that we're going to need to make the progress that we're seeking to make on the really ambitious items that are before us, whether it's on questions of affordable housing or climate change or racial equity or what have you. So I think that's both the mechanics and some of the kind of principles that led us to this moment.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So my first question for Councilmember Hudson: how did the ranked choice vote election change the way that you campaigned? So tell us a little bit about the interactions you had with voters and also your interactions with other candidates running in a ranked choice vote system.
Yeah, so I think perhaps maybe this is surprising, but I was, for a long time, for most of my campaign, I was the only candidate that was actually talking about ranked choice voting. And it was always something that I knew I would do. I looked at, other cities or municipalities who had participated in ranked choice voting, and the overwhelming data showed that candidates who talked about ranked choice voting and who educated voters on ranked choice voting had a far greater chance of winning their elections. So I always planned to talk about ranked choice voting. Towards the end, I think a few other people started talking about it. But it was, I think there was definitely a learning curve, for both candidates and the electorate. And I think it was, a bit challenging in the beginning. A lot of people just didn't even know the term ranked choice voting. But then I think once we got over that hump, then it just became about more of the specifics and the logistics of, when I go to vote, when I go to my polling site, what's it going to look like? What's the ballot going to look like? So we did a lot of information, information campaigns about like literally what the ballot would look like, how to fill out the ballot, how to select up to 5 choices. I ended up doing a informational video that I posted on social media. And then candidates all across the city came together to host like very large sort of info sessions for people across New York City. So for example, I did one with like LGBTQ candidates, and we hosted an info session there. I did another one with Brooklyn candidates. So we had a number of different ones. We ensured we had language access for everyone. So we had translation services in a number of different languages that were relevant to New Yorkers. And I think we pretty much exhausted everyone with ranked choice voting, because I think that was what was necessary in order to get as many people participating as possible.
So a lot of times when we're talking about ranked choice voting, one of the benefits that people bring up is sort of the coalition building nature of asking somebody to be their second choice. Is that something that you found yourself asking a lot for people to rank you second or third on their ballots?
It is. So, I mean, again, that was, one of my talking points was, if you don't want to select me as your number one choice, I hope you'll consider me as your number two. And then I would explain, my platform and why I thought people should put me as their number two. It also, it makes you it forces you to talk to more people, because instead of, getting that no, and then, you mark them down as a, not persuadable, then, you generally walk away from them, right? And you don't further engage with that person. But this allows you the opportunity to talk to more voters, to talk to more people, and to get your message out, to more people, which I suppose on, one side makes it a little bit more burdensome to candidates or to campaigns. It makes you want to and need to knock on more doors and talk to more people, instead of narrowing it down to people who you think are, most likely to vote for you. Even people who might be least likely to vote for you can still vote for you. So that whole dynamic changes. And so I always talked about, putting me down as your number two choice, or even your third or fourth choice. But really, I think we focused on number one and number two.
So my next question is for Daniel Biss. One of the biggest concerns that people have brought up is that it seems more complicated than the way elections are currently run. So what are some of the key points that a public education campaign would need to address, if this passes in November?
Well, I think that we get caught up in the questions that are least important for the voters. We get often, and I have totally fallen into this pitfall myself, so I'm not pointing fingers anywhere but here. But we start explaining this, and then we wind up, with a whiteboard and crossing numbers off, and like, here's what happens when this person gets crossed off the list. And understanding the technical mechanics of how the election is operated is interesting, and it's important to be transparent about that and to make that information available for folks. But the voter doesn't need to know that. What the voter needs to know is what we're asking of them, which is rank your candidates. And that's easy. That's simple. The voter needs to know, number one, if you just want to vote for one person, if Crystal Hudson is the only person you could bear to see in the New York City Council, you vote for her and walk out of that voting booth, and that's just fine. But you also have the opportunity, if you are so inclined, to say who your second and even third and fourth choice are. And so I think we have to kind of have like a two-track communication plan. One is the whole enchilada. Here's all the information, here's all the details, here's the FAQ with all the technicalities spelled out clearly. But number two, here's what you need to know in order to be an informed voter, and that is that you have the opportunity to rank as many candidates as you want to rank, and therefore your second and third choice may turn out to be relevant for determining who gets elected.
Okay. So just a follow up on that, some other municipalities have experienced that the counting process takes longer than voters might be used to. Is that something that people might have to worry about, or should be concerned about if this comes to Evanston?
Well, I think it's a reality. So I think if that is worrying to you, then yes, it's something to be worried about. And again, I would really defer to Councilmember Hudson, who's lived it before. But I think what people need to understand is that delay is baked in. We need to educate people in advance. It's not a sign that something is broken. It's not an indication that someone's not doing their job. It just takes a little bit of time to do the tabulation for, and the technical reason is because you need to know the order in which to cross people off. So you need to know who comes in last. And in a race where, let's say there's a few candidates with a tiny number of votes, you got to count all the absentee and late arriving mail ballots before you're ready to do that. I had a funny conversation with a gentleman by the name of Melvin Carter, who's the mayor of St. Paul. He was elected mayor of St. Paul in their most recent election, and there was a ranked choice voting system. And he said, the night before the election, I sat my kids down and explained, this is going to feel really strange. We've thrown everything into this, and the election's tomorrow, and the polls are going to close, and then we're just going to have to go to bed not knowing. And I know it's going to feel strange, but you're just going to have to put up with it, and we're going to know soon enough. And then, of course, he got over 50% of the vote, and he was, giving a victory speech on election night, and his kids were like, "Well, why'd you lie to me, Dad?" But so there are circumstances where we'll know immediately, and there are circumstances where we'll have to allow the tabulation process to take some time. But that doesn't ask anything extra of the voter, and it doesn't mean that something is broken. It just means that all the votes need to come in and be counted before we can declare who the winner is. By the way, at least the last thing I'll say before asking Councilmember Hudson to break in here is, if you looked at how that played out in New York on the mayor's race, which we, maybe some of us followed from Evanston, there was a kind of a lag between when you could kind of tell what the outcome was almost certainly going to be and when the outcome was officially announced. And so for kind of junkies who really want to know, you may have a pretty good idea of where things are going, but nonetheless, it's important to do the process properly and correctly and wait for all the information to come in before you declare any winners or certify any elections or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, you do have on election night, it's not final, obviously, but you have a sense of where things are or might be. So hopefully that'll alleviate any concerns that people have. Although, again, those aren't going to be the final numbers, but I think it's much better to wait a little bit longer to have a process like ranked choice voting than to spend the millions of dollars, or at least here in New York City, it costs millions and millions of dollars to have a runoff election. And I just don't think that's like the most prudent way of spending taxpayer money. So I think, waiting a little bit longer certainly has its payoffs.
Well, and another point, you make a great point about the runoff election, which is the system we have today. And so right now you wait 6 weeks between when the field for the runoff is set and when the runoff actually occurs.
Right.
So that's actually a lot more waiting than would occur in a ranked choice voting system.
So my next question is back to Councilmember Hudson. You did win, congratulations. Has ranked choice voting affected how you govern? So are there measures that you introduced or policy positions you've taken that were affected by knowing you had a coalition of first and second or third place choice voters supporting you?
I would say yes and no. As far as like my principles and the policies and pieces of legislation that I've introduced based on my principles and also my platform, that hasn't really changed. And even the way I spoke to potential voters who I knew weren't putting me as number one, who I was trying to get to put me as number two, my pitch to them was the same really as my pitch to people who I thought were more likely to vote for me as their number one choice. And then I guess, on the other side, I would say yes, in terms of election reform and everything related to campaigns and our Board of Elections, which is actually at the state level. So the city council doesn't have much jurisdiction over how that's run, but still advocating. The chair of the elections committee in the state Senate is a senator who overlaps with my district. So we've had lots of conversations about my experience with ranked choice voting and how that might play into legislation that he introduces at the state level. And then also, here in New York, we have ranked choice voting at the city level, but we don't have it at the state level. So he, for example, hasn't, experienced ranked choice voting firsthand. Certainly as a voter, he has, but not as an elected official. So I would say, it's mixed yes and no. But if I can, I would love to just share a couple of really quick stats on that from exit polls on election day last year. Just going back to the last question, for Mayor Bliss that showed that 83% of voters ranked at least 2 candidates on their ballots in the mayoral primary in New York City. And the majority of those who opted not to rank did so because they only had one preferred candidate. 72% of voters ranked 3 or more candidates. 42% of voters maximized their newfound power and ranked 5 candidates. And 77% of New Yorkers want ranked choice voting in future local elections. So I think, you could see from those numbers that the overwhelming majority ranked folks, even if it wasn't all 5 positions, it was at least 2. And also the overwhelming majority of people want to see ranked choice voting expanded in other municipalities.
So in your election, nobody won in the first round, and then after the second round, the lowest candidate was eliminated. You got their second place, or a lot of second place votes, and then you broke 50%. Did you have any conversations with the candidate whose supporters ended up coming to you for their second afterwards?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No, not really. And the only reason for that is my race was a very tense race, I suppose I would classify it as. And so I'm really proud of the fact that I ran my race, that, a campaign that was rooted in love and honesty and integrity. And I never, spoke poorly or negatively about any of the other candidates, which is not to say that they didn't do that about me or each other. And so I haven't really talked to many of the candidates that were in my race, if I'm honest. But I think my team did, a lot of sort of evaluating, the results. And there were candidates that we knew we were most likely to get their second choice votes, also based on knocking on doors and talking to voters and hearing from people who said, oh, well, I'm torn between you and this person, or I have, a longstanding relationship with this person and I know them, so I'm definitely putting them number 1. But if I didn't have that relationship, I would definitely put you, so I'm going to put you as my number 2. So we had, I think, a pretty good sense of where things would fall.
So it sounds like a positive campaign really worked for you.
Oh, 100%. And I will tell anyone who will listen, I mean, not just, in campaigns, I think in life, it always pays to be, kind. But yeah, and that was also a statistic or research that we had done around ranked choice voting. I would say, it's who I am anyway. But ranked choice voting, my team did a lot of research on ranked choice voting because it was new and because it was the first time. And I was also a first time candidate. And so everything was sort of, new and overwhelming. And we just wanted to make sure we did the things that were most likely to help us win. And one of those things was absolutely running a positive campaign. And, the numbers show that candidates who ran negative campaigns in ranked choice election or ranked choice voting elections were less likely to win their races. So it just helped that that was, sort of our approach anyway.
So that was the first election you'd run in. As an incumbent next time, are you looking forward to another ranked choice vote election?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ranked choice voting is definitely the way to go. And, like again, Mayor Bliss said, even if you only have one option or one choice or one favorite, you still have the opportunity to put more than one person on the ballot. And I think that is what democracy is. Democracy is choice, really, and ensuring that people are empowered to make those choices for themselves. So yeah, I'm excited to see how ranked choice voting will look as an incumbent, and also just our second time at it here in New York City.
So my final question before we start taking questions from the audience is for both of you. If this ballot initiative succeeds, and we all hope it will, What can Evanston learn from New York and other cities who've implemented RCV as we move forward with education and implementation?
You want to go first or?
Sure. I mean, I definitely have less to say about this one. But I think Councilmember Hudson's statistics really are a lesson that we don't have anything to be afraid of here. The people will embrace this. The people will make use of it. The people will enjoy making use of it. That they'll probably get used to feeling like voting without the opportunity to rank your second choice isn't even voting at all.
Right.
And so I think, sometimes when there's something new that feels complicated, there might be a tendency to feel apologetic about it, or to feel, like you're kind of imposing on people to explain something complicated and confusing. And this is not that. This is something that people will, I think, instinctively get once it's presented to them, and I think they'll enjoy it and appreciate it and feel like they have a greater opportunity to actually participate in a meaningful way. I'll just quickly on this point before I close say, we all know a lot of people. I suspect I know a lot of people. I'm guessing you all know a lot of people. Maybe sometimes we even are people who kind of feel like, I don't even know if I want to vote because the person I really most believe in doesn't seem to have much of a chance. And then I'm gonna kind of be backed into a corner of choosing between two people I'm not really as excited about, and that feels unsatisfying. So maybe I'll skip out of the whole process altogether. Ranked choice voting is a tool that enables someone who would otherwise feel that way to be an equal participant in the electoral process. And I think in a time that we have a lot of residents who understandably feel frustrated, unheard, or even disenfranchised, the opportunity to present ranked choice voting as a way to more fully have your voice weighed in to the election process is really going to be an exciting one.
Yeah, and I would just add that ranked choice voting really provides an opportunity for, quote unquote, non-traditional candidates like myself, as a Black gay woman, to be elected. When I ran my campaign, we have 51 council members in New York City. And when I ran my campaign, we had 14 women serving out of 51, and 31 women were elected. So we more than doubled the number of women elected to the New York City Council, which is an unprecedented number. We've never had a majority women city council in New York ever. We are also a majority people of color. I was, along with a colleague of mine, we were the first two out gay Black women to ever win in New York City. We had the first Muslim woman elected in New York City, the first Indian man elected in New York City, the first two Korean women elected in New York City. We had so many firsts, it's hard to even keep track of them. And really, I think that, certainly in part is owed to ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting, gave all of us a shot and a greater chance at, ending up in that number one spot on the ballot when you take into consideration all the folks, who fall off first, and giving you the opportunity to gain a few more votes. And so I think there's so much to be gained. And there was a lot of sort of racist banter, I would say, and messaging from people who said like, oh, communities of color aren't going to get it. Immigrant communities aren't going to get it. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to use it. And we just didn't see that. In fact, we saw almost the opposite, where communities of color and immigrant communities and, otherwise marginalized communities, embraced ranked choice voting and embraced candidates who look like me. And, and so I think ranked choice voting is really, again, just about democracy in its like truest form, both from a candidate perspective and also as a voter, giving people the opportunity to really elect people who look like them.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's It's great to hear all the firsts coming out of New York. So I'm gonna take a quick break here. We're gonna put on a short video sort of for the people who haven't seen the explanation of how ranked choice voting works. It's about a minute long. And then anybody who has questions, drop them into the chat box. And then I'll come back and we'll go through all the questions from the audience. So just a moment, and let me get this queued up here. All right, so this actually comes from, I believe, Minnesota Public Radio on the on how ranked choice voting works.
Greg, we don't hear sound if there's supposed to be sound.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, is there no sound on this? Give me
No
a second.
sound.
And then if people could drop the here, I'm gonna pass this on to our tech guy who's better at this than I am. But again, if people could drop their questions into chat, we'll come back with those in just a minute. All right, Neil, you got that?
Pick your favorite color.
The ranked choice voting way.
Instead of voting for just one color, you get to rank your top 3.
Well, purple is the best, but if I can't have purple, I want blue. And if neither of those wins, I guess I can live with orange.
Now, let's count up everybody's votes.
Under ranked choice voting rules, it's not enough just to get the most votes. You need a majority.
More than 50% of the votes.
Purple's ahead, but it has only 7 votes.
It needs at least 11 to win.
So we eliminate the color in last place.
Sorry, Orange fans, we're going to your second choice.
2 more for green,
1 for purple.
but no color has 11 votes yet.
Still no majority.
Bye-bye,
blue.
1 more for purple,
4 for green.
and we have a winner.
The ranked choice voting way.
Okay, so we've gotten some questions through chat here. I'll start off with the first one. So it's a question about the Alaska elections. So Alaska has their ranked choice vote statewide. The question is, Republicans went, and this is the questioner's words, a little nutty after the Alaska election. Is there any data out about how the Alaskans felt about it? Like in Minnesota and New York, polls said they wanted more ranked choice vote. Were there similar results from Alaska? Sorry,
Councilmember Hudson. Oh, she's muted and probably unable to mute herself.
I'm sorry, there we go.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just about to message Neil. I actually haven't seen any statistics or results or poll results from Alaska. But that's a good question. I'd be curious to find out.
I haven't either, but what I will say is that the what was the phrase, a little nuts behavior of the Republicans?
So the Republicans came out pretty strongly against ranked choice voting in Alaska.
Right. No, I know. But I was just going to make the point that they were really wrong on the merits, that in a non-ranked choice voting system, the same outcome would have happened. The candidate who won, the Democrat, which was sort of shocking to people, she had more votes than either one of the other two candidates. So she would have won in a sort of traditional system. Ranked choice voting is kind of the only thing that could have saved Republicans in that situation. You might have thought that the voters who voted for one Republican candidate would have marked the other one second, and vice versa. And had they all done that, a Republican would have won the election. And so the thing they're mad at is the ranked choice voting system, which is the only thing that could have saved them. But ultimately, their candidates were unpopular enough that nothing could have saved them. Which,
And I'll just add really quickly a similar situation where here in New York, our mayor during his campaign railed against ranked choice voting and, said everything under the sun about how awful it was and how bad of a decision it was for us to implement it. And in the end, I mean, he won by the skin of his teeth only because of ranked choice voting. If the results had been, in the traditional format, he wouldn't have won. So, I think that just goes to show you that sometimes the people who are the biggest opponents to something like ranked choice voting are actually also the ones who stand to gain the most.
So another question comes to us about, so this is a reference to it going statewide. And right now, New York City implemented it for their municipal elections. We're trying to implement it for our municipal elections. And I know, Mayor Biss, when you were in the state Senate, you proposed ranked choice voting for statewide elections in Illinois. Do either of you foresee this spreading beyond New York and Evanston to apply to statewide elections in the states?
I can speak to Illinois. I continue to believe it would be a good thing in Illinois. I think, obviously for most partisan elections, for the general election, it doesn't matter that much, though there are obviously exceptions. But I think in partisan primaries, I think it could be really, really helpful. And frankly, for a state like Illinois, and I'm afraid New York isn't that different, with a strong history of machine politics, it can be really, really useful in kind of having insurgent independent candidates run against the machine. Having a ranked choice system can be very valuable. That's why I think it'd be really good. And it's also why I had no chance of passing that bill when I was in the legislature. I don't believe anything's impossible. I think that this type of reform is the way of the future. I think it's going to be a while before we get there on a statewide basis in Illinois. And I think having communities like Evanston implement it and having it go well in these communities is going to be a critical step along the way.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think certainly its success in New York City, hopefully will show the state that we should implement it statewide. But to all the same points that Mayor Biss mentioned, at the state level, we still have a lot of machine politics. And so until they see the value of ranked choice voting for themselves, then, I think I'll keep hoping and wishing that it happens.
So the next question pertains to the public education campaign. So somebody asks, what kind of public education campaign should we do? And I guess I'll also ask Councilmember Hudson, what did you find was most effective in the public education campaign that New York City ran?
To be perfectly honest, one of the critiques that candidates had was that the city hadn't really done enough. There wasn't really enough money invested in informing voters and New Yorkers in general about ranked choice voting. And so we felt like a lot of the work fell on our shoulders, which was a lot to ask of candidates. Many of us, again, were first time candidates, and so it was a lot. I think anytime you have somebody like Mayor Biss, who is an advocate of this type of system and willing to put resources behind information campaigns, then I think that's for certainly for the better. I think it worked out well in New York City, but I think we could still use even the second go round a little bit more. I do think there were some people, certainly not a significant number, but some people who may not have voted because they felt like it might be too overwhelming or they just didn't understand it. And so with a little bit more effort, I think, from the city, we would see an even greater turnout.
Well, thank you very much. So the next question comes, and this is a little open-ended. So why it's just why do you think this is good for Evanston? And I think I'd like to narrow that down a little more. What is it about Evanston that makes us a good starting place for this kind of movement in Illinois?
Well, let's be honest. We like to push the envelope. We like to be on the leading edge. We're the first. At this moment, we're the only municipality in the city that has paid reparations. We are, try to be at the forefront of work on climate and a variety of issues. And so I think we're more comfortable being that first mover than a lot of communities might be. We also have an unbelievable level of political engagement and activity. And that means a variety of things. One thing it means is we often have a lot of candidates. And we often have a lot of candidates, and this is not Democrats versus Republicans, right? This is people running on a nonpartisan election who probably agree about 90% of the national issues that are kind of hot buttons, and so it's quite likely that they're overlapping coalitions. That there are voters who are torn between a few different candidates, and that type of election is the exact kind of election where ranked choice voting can be really meaningful and can really help a voter feel like they're actually expressing their preference in a realistic and faithful way, rather than kind of turning it into a vote for this one and against all the others. It doesn't really reflect how they feel. So I think it makes sense in nonpartisan elections and really engaged communities. I think the fact that we have a runoff system is, just doing away with those runoffs is a really great idea. I mean, the notion, it's hard enough getting halfway decent turnout in a February or April election in an odd numbered year. To do them both 6 weeks apart, I think is really just unrealistic. And we see very, very low turnout often in one or the other, if not both of those elections as a result. So I think doing away with the runoff is a really nice idea. And I don't think this is unique to Evanston, but I do think that we're grappling right now with the question of how to turn a ton of passion and strong feelings into collective action, when sometimes a lot of passion and strong feelings can just turn into a big fight and no action. I do think a ranked choice voting system is a little bit better suited to selecting for people who, there's some overlap between being the person who's really good at asking for a voter to mark them second and being someone who can work in coalition to do something complicated and perhaps controversial.
I'll just, if I may, I don't know a whole lot about Evanston, but I would say that it always takes somebody to do it for the first time, and somebody, with a bold vision to be the first, and the courage, honestly, and the political will to be the first, and to really show, other municipalities across the state what is actually possible. So you all are lucky to have Mayor Biss at the helm, and advocating for such an amazing program like ranked choice voting.
So that was the last of the questions that I got from the audience. We have a few minutes, so I was going to open it up. Was there anything you wanted to say that I didn't ask about?
Would it be okay if I asked a question of Councilmember Hudson?
Absolutely.
So as a real municipal election system nerd, I've been a big fan of New York City since well before y'all had ranked choice voting, because of your small donor matching campaign finance system. It's something we don't have here in Evanston, though it's something I support, and it's something a lot of folks on council support. And as we were going through the process to put ranked choice voting on the ballot, there were some folks on our council who said, listen, this seems like a good idea, but it really would pair well in important ways with a public financing system. And so I'm just wondering if you could comment at all on the public financing system you have and on the role that it might have played in sort of pairing with ranked choice voting as kind of a two-pronged approach that makes it easier for, as you put it, non-traditional candidates to run and then be successful?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Thank you for that. First of all, I think we have one of the best, or certainly most expansive, public funding systems in the country, probably. And the threshold to qualify for matching funds is fairly low. You have to raise a minimum of $5,000 and have 75 in-district donors. And then you're qualified for matching funds. And then, there's some other specifics around whether you get the maximum amount or another amount. But it really is an equalizer. I mean, it gives people who don't have, either the networks to raise a ton of money to run, a campaign in New York City, or even the time to spend, fundraising and doing call time and all of that. If you have, for example, a single parent who might want to run for office, this is giving them a leg up. This is saying, instead of, sacrificing having dinner with your kid every night, in order to fundraise and make calls, this gives you that time back. And this says, you're essentially guaranteed to get some money as long as you qualify for the program. And so maybe you're just spending your time knocking on doors and not knocking on doors and worrying about fundraising. So it gives everybody the leg up. And I think paired with ranked choice voting, I don't know that there really is a better system and a better opportunity for, non-traditional candidates. I think, I would even, say ranked choice voting really, it's a great big step, but without a public financing program, it's not enough. And I think pairing the two together really does make it absolutely possible for generally anybody to run for office. And that's what we need more of. And you mentioned having lots of candidates because of, what and who Evanston is. I think a public financing campaign is just yet another opportunity to expand that base. And also, to empower communities to know that they can, send somebody to run to represent them, knowing that they'll have the backing of a public financing campaign. So I would say, if you've got the support to do it, you should absolutely pursue it. And I think public financing really should be everywhere. I don't think that candidates should have to raise money in order to try to represent, their communities. So I think, there's still some reforms as far as public financing goes that I would like to see happen, but I think we're doing pretty all right in New York.
All right. Well,
Thank you very
you
much.
so much.
Yeah. And happy to, have another conversation offline, if that would be helpful.
Thank you. It will.
All right.
Thank you. That was really an exciting segue into maybe the future of these conversations after we get the deed done on our current ballots. So again, I'm Rachel. I'm with the Democratic Party of Evanston. Your ballots are available at the Civic Center. Early voting started on Monday. It will be going through up until Election Day. I think it's closed on a couple of Sundays and then open the last Sunday, but check Google whether they're open if you're curious on a Sunday, but otherwise 9 to 5 at the Civic Center. Right now you can go vote. The Democratic Party of Evanston is endorsing ranked choice voting, and we do hope that you vote yes for it. And we still have a couple of weeks until the actual election day and have lots of election related activities going on. And if you are feeling moved by this conversation about the movement toward ranked choice voting or want to get involved with the Evanston Democrats, we will have folks at the polls on election day. If you'd like to volunteer your time to have conversations with voters and provide them a sample ballot, or if you'd like to help us get some food to poll workers or whatever the small and big jobs we have that day, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is info@evanstondems.com, or you can always message us on Facebook or social media or text whoever you know who's involved with DPOE. So I want to thank Councilmember Hudson and Mayor Biss so much for their time and their just a wonderful energy behind this issue. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Could I just say two quick things in closing?
Oh, of course. I'm
First of
sorry.
all,
I thought you
We're so lucky to have Councilmember Hudson here tonight.
Yes.
I mean, I'm an obnoxiously arrogant enough politician to think that I really knew this subject well, but I learned so much tonight just hearing directly from someone who's done what she's done. So thank you, really thank you. I know you're busy. I know that it's not really in your parochial interest to hang out with folks from halfway across the country, but we really, really benefit, and I personally appreciate it tremendously. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to talk about ranked choice voting, honestly, to anyone who will listen. So thanks for inviting me to join you all this evening. Good luck to all of you in your endeavors in ranked choice voting. And like I said, happy to connect offline, Mayor Biss, and talk about public financing and all that good stuff.
That'd be great. I would love that. And the other thing I wanted to say to the folks in this call is Rachel's, of course, absolutely right. The polls are going to be open until 2 weeks from an hour ago. There's all kinds of stuff to do. We need you. We all need to be involved. But let's be super real about this. If you're talking to your friends and neighbors in Evanston, you got to get them out. Don't get me wrong. But there's a pretty good chance they already know they're voting for JB Pritzker and Tammy Duckworth and Jan Schakowsky. And you probably won't be able to convince them to vote for a different candidate for governor or US Senate or for US House. They may well not even know there's a ranked choice voting referendum on the ballot at all, right? Your neighbor's voting for JB, but your neighbor may not know that this referendum even exists. So if you were persuaded by what you heard tonight, communicating with the folks in your network, including committed, partisan, progressive Democrats, you never have to tell to turn out or what side to vote for in the November election, communicating with them is a high leverage, valuable opportunity. Spread the word because this referendum is important. I think it can do a lot for our community, and there's a lot of folks who are still learning about it. And for the folks who trust you to hear from you about what an opportunity this is for us is invaluable.
And I approve that message.
Thank you so much. Thanks for wrapping up and for the closing statements. We really do appreciate you all. And this will be posted on social media. So the folks who are here, please share it to your social media as well, so more Evanstonians can watch this video and learn like we did here tonight. Have a good evening and happy voting.